Really think about every piece of infrastructure you add. I think code is cheap, but infrastructure is not. Honestly, it's kind of like one of our mantles. Like we rewrite code often, but once you put pieces of infrastructure in place, they have gravity about them.
Hi everyone, you're listening to Scaling DevTools, the show that investigates how DevTools go from 0 to 1. I'm joined today by Josh Twist, who is the founder of Zuplo. And Zuplo is API management that you actually want to use at any size of company. And I discovered Josh on Twitter a while ago, Zuplo, because I think it's solving a really important problem. And yeah, it's so nice to have you on the show, Josh.
Likewise, Jack. Thanks for inviting me.
Could you tell us a bit about Zuplo and how you got to the point of founding Zuplo?
I can. It's a little bit of a journey, so I'll try and keep it brief, but real. So, like you, I'm a Brit. I'm now American citizen, actually, just recently. Been here for 13 years. Worked at Microsoft in the UK and then moved over to the States. And when I moved over to the States, became a product manager and founded a number of products in Azure. One of which was Azure API management, which is a competitor to Zuplo, to put it bluntly. And that was founded through an acquisition of a company called Epiphany, spelled API. Beautiful name. Credit to those folks. Great team. And that was where it began. So, I've been in this market. I've been looking at this market for a long time. I left and did other things. I worked at Facebook for 5 years. I was at Stripe for a little while. As head of product for payment methods. So again, very API. My whole career is very developer focused, and a lot of API related work. And I remember at the time I left the API management team at Microsoft. I actually left with a bunch of suggestions about how they could make the product much better, like really kind of turn it on its head. Because one of my observations about API management, which let me explain what it is briefly. I'll take just a pause for a second. API management is a set of tools that help you ship and manage APIs much more quickly and take a lot of the pain out of it. So there's a lot of players in this market, like big tools, big companies use like Apigee and Kong. One of the ways I looked at it is I actually think this market isn't really being attacked in quite the right way, because typically API management is only used by very large organizations in the most cases. It's very expensive. It's very difficult to learn and understand. And I felt like really there's a huge missed opportunity for a product that helps smaller businesses, like startups even, to launch an amazing API experience for their API consumers and just get that out of the box and roll it quickly. So this is a hypothesis I held for a long time, but I think there were two problems that kind of led to my manifesto for Zuplo. One is it's just too hard to learn these tools today. They don't fit neatly into the development workflow. So, a lot of the configuration for these things is stored in a database, which is kind of weird. I mean, imagine as an engineer, I told you had to put lines of code in different rows of a database. I mean, you'd just throw up, right? So from the beginning, it was things like, hey, to make this fit into the developer workflow and make it a product they'd actually want to use, we have to make it text-based. So everything that defines the gateway can be saved in Git, right? And that enables things like GitOps and a bunch of other things that we can get into later if it's of interest. But making it easy and making it fit into a developer's workflow is kind of one of our key points. And the other one is it's crazy expensive. So large companies tend to use these products because they can afford to, and small companies, like, they're not going to pay, I don't know, $100,000 or whatever it takes to get these folks out of bed to have a conversation with a salesperson. So in my mind, I'm like, look, if we can build a product that meets that easy to use bar, is a pleasure for developers, and is like reasonably priced, and by that it's cheaper for a small, medium, or even large business to use this than to hire engineers and do it and manage it themselves, then that's a winning proposition, right? You don't want to take on this API workload of like authentication and API keys and rate limiting on distributed, which is really hard. You kind of want to buy that as long as it's cost effective. And so those two things is kind of the manifesto we have for how we're going to democratize API management and make it something every business wants to use.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. And I was working on a product and I did to do with chat, and it was an API, and then you realize like there's so much like overhead to actually just, that isn't really specific at all to what you're doing, but just, as you said, like the having API keys and rate limiting, and even generating docs and all this sorts of stuff that I think you're taking care of really well. And yeah, the platform super easy to use.
Yeah, I did a recording like this yesterday with one of our customers that we're going to put on our website. Actually, a guy called Tom Carden, he's head of engineering at Rewiring America, which is a cool project. And they just launched their API. And the way he phrased it is, if I can buy this and it's reasonably priced, which he says Zuplo is, then I can spend time focusing on problems that are unique to my problem domain. Like, I don't want to reinvent the wheel and build API key management and do a good job of it. He said, yeah, perhaps, if I put some of my best engineers on it, I can bang this out in a few weeks, but it's not going to be anywhere near the quality of, what he's getting out of Zuplo. And so really it's kind of opportunity cost as well. Engineers sometimes love to build themselves. That's probably my biggest competitor, frankly. Certainly at the small end of the market, the larger folks tend to be a bit more comfortable buying things because engineers love solving these problems over again. But, really that's a distraction from the energy you should be putting into making a freaking great API that does whatever that API is supposed to do, and not getting API. Because doing API keys well, I have an article on this I can add for your show notes if you like, about like the best practices for implementing API key authentication. There's a lot to think about. Don't waste your time thinking about that stuff. Just use a solution out of the box and get it done, and know you're secure and safe. So
yeah. I mean, totally agree. And it's just like small things, even like having your API key side by side with your docs and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I know that you guys do, which was like, oh, that's really cool. I wouldn't do that in like a V1 of my product, but then if like it's already there, it's like great.
We got tons of more stuff coming there as well. We talk about like Stripe is the gold standard, I think, still really. There's some good new people coming through with really cool innovations on API, but Stripe is still the gold standard. So we talk about like, we'll give you a Stripe quality API out of the box. You build your API and then suddenly we'll make that experience as good for your users as Stripe make it for theirs.
Yeah, amazing. And in terms of like developer experience, like, could you talk about some of the things that you've done specifically beyond what we just mentioned to make that experience really good, and also like the kind of process that you've followed, because I know you've got a lot of experience in this space.
Yeah. So I mean, some of the things we've done specifically, it's a long list, because this is what good experience looks like. It's like attention to detail, right? Like I'm not going to list them all. You'd see some of the arguments we have about the API design of the Zuplo runtime componentry and so on. But it's things like, but actually what I'll explain in a second is the principles that lead us to spend time on that. Things like GitOps. So we make it very easy. Hat tip to Vercel and Netlify for kind of really mainstreaming this. Make it incredibly easy for you to deploy a gateway. You just do a push to GitHub, and we'll deploy every branch as a new environment. And that is a game changer in the API management landscape, by the way. Like, setting up new environments takes hours typically. With other solutions is very expensive. You will pay a lot of money for each of those environments. It's we have customers with 250 deployed concurrent production environments, and that's because people are collaborating and previewing. So making it easy for a developer to have an idea and then get it live and show it to a colleague is like good developer experience. Making it so that they can see the history of their changes in whatever Git tool they're using. We support GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, etc. We think that's good experience by not storing things in a database that's strange. Infrastructure as code, so the fact that everything is defined as a text file means Zuplo is very self-contained. I don't have to make a long script to deploy this thing. It's like, there's my definition, go and deploy it somewhere for me, please. And those are things. And then one other thing is that's really important to me, we haven't talked about with Zuplo, is it being programmable. I'm an engineer. I've written a lot of code on Zuplo. I've never stopped coding, even when I became a product manager at Facebook and so on. It's a hobby I love. And nothing irks me more than when I'm using a tool, but it kind of blocks me from deploying my superpower of writing code. And so many of these solutions, they have a lot of built-in policies and plugins, like we have as well. We have a solid list. But what's really important to us is that we expose all the power that I have as a Zuplo engineer to our users to extend the platform. And we do so in a way that I'm not going to just throw shade at competitors, but a lot of solutions do extensions very badly. Like the API is very difficult to learn. It's unintuitive. It doesn't kind of follow. It doesn't look like things developers have seen elsewhere. So that was really important to us when we designed our programmability layer. And that would be, hey, look, this writing code here should feel like I'm writing JavaScript in a web browser, or I'm writing JavaScript in Node.js and I'm using Express. And all of those concepts should just sort of seem obvious to me. So we have policies that are like middleware. We use web standards everywhere. So, the libraries and classes like fetch, request, response are all web standards that you can find on MDN. There's nothing weird or opaque or particularly Zuplo about it. So that makes it much easier for people to find examples, to learn what we're doing and understand what we're doing. The principles these stem from, I think, one of the things I learned at Facebook was the power of removing friction. So Facebook is an experiment machine. Like, they run a lot of experiments and they're fantastic with data. They have fantastic tools. And so if something has a small impact on, whatever the goal is that you're trying to achieve with a product release, they will be able to measure it, and they can measure how that compounds over time. So if you spend time at an organization that's good at that, you start to see quickly that, things like removing friction from a process is insanely powerful in terms of creating a better experience for customers, to the point where it's really important when you're thinking about prioritization. We all have this approach to prioritization where we talk about impacts over cost often. It's like, how much impact is this big feature I'm going to have, and how much is it going to cost me? And we forget to spend time on some of the little things. But we as developers have all suffered from the death by 1,000 cuts problem, right? You just feel the pain of that. My favorite example of a product that exists only because really I think what it does is remove friction is probably Loom. I'm guessing most of your listeners have seen Loom. It's a video recording app. And think about what they're doing, right? You record a video and you can then send that video to friends. I mean, like, so what? That's been easy for ages, right? Like, I could have just opened QuickTime, done a camera recording, emailed it, or uploaded it to S3 and sent the link to someone. But in that, there's actually quite a lot of friction there. Some of these tools aren't kind of optimized. I'd have to wait for the upload before I can send the recording. And then I have to think about, how do I permission this and a couple of other things. What Loom does is I press record. It's uploading in the background, much like the tool we're using right now. It's uploading in the background. That means when I've finished making my little note for a colleague, I can send it right away, and I don't have to remember to go back after the upload is complete. And I can send them a link and I can manage my permissions. It's insane. And a whole product is just born out of removing friction. So we think about that in everything we do at Zuplo. How do we remove friction? And to the point where, like, the ideal outcome for us is using Zuplo feels like a slippery funnel where you're going to fall into the pit of success. Like, that's how we want it to feel. Like, you almost can't go wrong. I mean, we haven't done that yet. I don't think we got plenty to work on, but that's how we think about our goals. And then the other philosophy is, how do you enable power whilst keeping a simple experience at the beginning? I mean, I think it's pretty easy to design a product that is a simpler version of anything. Like, take any product that's reasonably complex and say, I'm going to make a simpler version of that. But you're probably going to cut back on features and capabilities in the process of doing so. It's also easy to create a product that's complicated and very powerful. Like, that's not too hard. What I think where you see the real art in product is, can people create a product that is easy for beginners but scales like step by step up to being super powerful, but still has that amazing onboarding experience that kind of glides me into that, that bit of success that we talked about. There's a great article about this. I can't remember the author's name, but I'll share it with you for the show notes. And it talks about how building product is like building a video game or designing a video game. And so if you think about Mario, when you start, you just got to kind of jump and run left and right, and it's pretty easy. And that's the easy product experience. And then the end level is like Bowser. You've got flame sticks spinning, and it's real tough. But what the game designers do is they build that nice step-by-step incremental. Now, how do you do that in products? Now, I don't have a flow chart for that. I don't have like, hey, here's my guide. Maybe I can probably start to condense thoughts on it over time, but maybe that's the book we talked about. But that's where the art comes in. But that's your goal. You really have to try and keep both. And one of the things that's hard as a company gets bigger is, well, we're going to add this feature, and you get kind of lazy. You just kind of bolt it on. But like, go back, think, how is this impacting the onboarding experience? How is this impacting the complexity, the conceptual count the user has to have in their head to understand your product at the beginning? So those are two real core principles to how we design, what we think we're doing when we design a good developer experience.
Yeah, I was actually, you kind of preempted the question I was going to ask about, like,
Sorry.
I was almost like trying to come up with like something that someone might ask, but like hypothetically, like you realize like everyone suddenly wants to be able to like choose where it's hosted or something. And like, you've got to add this feature and it's like really important. Clearly everyone wants it. Is it like you mentioned like not just bolting it on or
Yeah.
like, how do you kind of,
I think there's a couple of sort of mental exercises you can do here. One is imagine if you were designing the product from scratch again and you knew about this requirement at the time, how would you do it differently? And then you probably, when you receive a requirement like that, you probably have the most obvious one or two ways you would bolt it onto. You just slap it into your product, and then consider the product delta. How much better is the product I should have done before? And do I think it's worth the trade-off of the additional cost to sort of redesign some things? We often do that. Now, it's tricky because we can't break customers. We have large enterprises and so on. They don't like breaking changes. No developer likes breaking changes. But we're certainly willing to rewrite things a lot at Zuplo. We kind of have a bit of a philosophy I got from an old boss of mine, a guy called Vijay Raji. Code is cheap. This might be an alarming concept to some developers. They want to get it perfect and right the first time. I kind of think of it a bit like, when the regulations change, you redesign your cars. This is a Formula One analogy. I don't know if you're a Formula One fan or anyone is, but in Formula One, they race these cars, and then every like 5 years or so, they change the regulations a bit. And they you kind of have to redesign the car from scratch. And that must feel terrible because you perfected the previous car over 5 years. It's sunk costs, opportunity costs. So really it's a trade-off of prioritization like any other. But I find one of the most useful exercises is imagine if you were designing the product from scratch, how would you do it with this new requirement? And if it's a significant change, but it's significantly better, then do it.
And then, sorry, maybe this is getting into the weeds too much, but then would you like, if it was like a significant change, like how would you actually kind of go about that?
Do you mean from a design point of view, or like rolling it out and like managing a breaking change kind of thing, if it's breaking, for example?
I guess both, in the sense of just like like you realize you have to completely redesign how it like the design to the end user, but then also like how you've actually like architected things behind the scenes as well, maybe.
Yeah, actually, it's a good question. It's going to go into some new turf. Honestly, it's rare that we see some new requirement that means like completely, oh God, we got this so wrong, that we have to redesign everything. But I'm going to caveat that with, I think that's partly because we also spend a lot of time trying to compose the whole system that is Zuplo out of the right sized Lego blocks, and make it very composable. And we constantly try to keep things very simple and make decisions that sometimes it's like, I think this would be more powerful if we did it this way, but it's adding complexity to the system. And the reason for that is that does allow us to make changes much more quickly if we kind of get that componentry right. Again, there's some artistry to this, but we're very strict about that. I think an example that I can pull from the real world is whatever you think of Elon. I think Tesla's a pretty impressive company, and they're constantly simplifying, constantly making decisions that I think like the car industry would be, raising their eyebrows at and shocked at. And on a marginal basis, on a line item basis, people will be like, why have you done that? But really the fact that he's simplified the whole car, the whole system, like one example is they just removed the indicator stalks or the blinker stalks from the car and you press buttons, right? That's because it's less components, it's less things that can go wrong, less things to design. It's just a touch button now on the yoke or the steering wheel in the different models. So that as a single change actually caused a bit of disruption. Some customers didn't like it, blah, 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 blah. But decisions like that can really compound over time so that your system, your process, your ability to make a car and to change the design of that car and to is now so much more efficient that you just have a massive advantage over everybody else who's doing it the old way. So we think about that a lot in terms of the componentry of Zuplo that keeps us lightweight and keeps us flexible. I think that's one of the key things. When it comes to rolling out breaking changes, it's tricky to give you like a flow chart for that. I mean, obviously you have to have a lot of customer empathy. we try to find ways where there are nice off ramps. We try to design like a glide slope for customers. We typically invest in tools. So we just did a change that's kind of breaking actually. When we launched Zuplo, we knew we wanted everything to be defined in text files, and so we came up with this JSON schema called a routes.json, and that identified all the routes. A request comes in, what do you do with it? And over time, it just became clear to us how many of our customers were very invested in OpenAPI, which is like an open standard for specifying documents. And we realized we'd probably made a mistake here, and we should have just used OpenAPI and extended that format to be the routing format. And so we made a difficult decision. We've got like lots of features we want to build, but like, no, we think this is so fundamental. I mean, what could be more fundamental to a gateway than its routing table, right? That we're going to go and redo it. And we spent a lot of time designing that experience. So we're now open API first. That's what powers the gateway, which is really cool. But of course, anyone that was using the old version, we keep them running. They're still running today if they want to. We'll keep them alive for a while. So we have like a versioning strategy there. And we built a conversion tool that will take your routes.json, run it through a CLI, and turn it into an OpenAPI document. And it wasn't that hard. But we think that, has offered sort of the right experience for folks, and there's enough benefit that people are starting to want to switch over to OpenAPI now because they get a better developer portal. Perhaps they're already using OpenAPI, so it now fits into their workflow. Again, this is more like fitting into their workflow. Customers were using OpenAPI? I'm like, why are we making them translate this into routes.json? Let's take it. That's a good friction removing decision. We're going to invest in it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And like, I can see the benefits, and I really like how you transition them over. And it's just really cool that you put so much emphasis on like, taking things out. I think there can often be this kind of tendency, almost like a race, like we need to ship this feature, we need to add more to show people how much the product's improved by like things that are like, if you remove something, I guess it's hard to like kind of put that down as like, oh yeah, we launched this feature, even though it is a huge benefit to people that you've simplified it.
Oh yeah, there's a great few examples here that we think about a lot as well. So killing features can be hard as a business-to-business company. If you've got one big customer using it, Bill Gates used to talk about a number of products that he hated. I won't name any names at Microsoft because they were these big meaty things, and he wanted to kill them, but some of the Fortune 500 were using it. But it was never going to be a big business. And so he's like, it's a waste of time. I think, one chart I've seen that I like is kind of a histogram, a bar chart that shows percent, and on the y-axis would be percentage of customers using a feature, and then on the x-axis is different features. And what you really want to see in a product is like a pretty high percentage of customers using your core features. And then maybe there's like a little bit of a tail, it drops off, but it's still a high number. What you don't want to see is like one feature and then a massive line of like 2-3 percenters, because it's just the overhead of managing that. It's like indicator stalks everywhere, or blinker stalks as they might call it in the US. I'm actually not sure, despite living here. That's a nightmare. And I think you watch products die as a result of that. And so the example I'll give you is Zoom versus Skype. So Skype got to the point where, it was a similar thing as Zoom, right? Should have just owned when COVID happened, it should have just owned everything. But it had added a billion features that nobody used. That was like maintenance and drag. And they didn't spend time focusing on the most important feature, which is the quality of the audio and the latency, which is how Zoom came in and beat them. So if you think about your product and that adoption, like, look at these features, or if you're adding a new feature, think, really, am I going to get this high on the adoption cycle that makes it worth maintaining? And if not, don't build it. Spend that time improving your core feature, because that's where you're going to come in and get your butt kicked. So we think about stuff like that a lot as well. I like killing features. It's my favorite thing to do. We killed some stuff recently, some experiments. We worked with a customer on it. Very transparent with them, and agreed, look, I don't think this is the right way for this thing to work. So we'll help you do it a different way, and we're gonna shoot this thing in the face. That's an aggressive analogy, isn't it?
That's the episode title.
There you
go. Yeah, I love it. I love it. That's amazing. I think like everyone I'm thinking about this. Like, I think especially some people, myself included, have this kind of tendency for like loving new things, like finding it really easy to just like see this thing over here, like, oh, that's new, like this might change everything.
Yeah.
Instead of like what can sometimes feel a bit more boring, because it's like if you're getting an incremental improvements over time on like the core thing that you're really good at, it's maybe not as exciting. But as you said, it's like why people will switch it.
Yeah, it compounds. That's the thing. Like, again, credit to Vijay Raji, an old boss of mine at Facebook, who used to talk about this all the time. Like, he'll take lots of 1% wins over taking shots at like the 50% win, you know, because they're easier to land, and you get a few of those and they very quickly compound over time.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. And one thing that you have this like kind of talent for making videos, it seems.
Thanks.
I discovered you through Twitter. I think I posted about like looking for, I didn't know what I was looking for, but something to make it easier to build APIs for dev tools that you could put out in the world and have like the auth and all that. And someone shared the video that you made for Superbase customers. So I guess there's two questions. One is partnerships, and two is content, and kind of wrapping that all together. I'd love to hear what you've been doing.
Okay, so let's do partnerships first. There's a bit of a saying about partnerships, actually, that I like. You know, we're a small business at this point. You know, we're not a Microsoft or something. And I get approached a lot by partnerships from other small businesses. I tend not to do them. I wouldn't recommend them. I'm not going to say, well, the saying is 2 turkeys don't make an eagle, you know. Like that's a huge distraction. Now, I'm not saying Zuplo's a turkey. Of course it's not. It's a young eagle about soon to soar with the other eagles of the world, of course. But, you know, that doesn't make a lot of sense to us. Superbase is, you know, certainly closer to eagle status. They've done an amazing job on distribution. The focus there really was, well, I'll start from another way. One of the way we got some of our first customers at Zuplo was sending out cold emails, actually. We just tried it. We hit some people at the right time. Really proud of those stories, actually, because of the sponsorship we managed to win from certain people. But that's hard. To use like an analogy, sending cold emails to people who are thinking about API management or adopting a platform, I mean, it's just like blindfolding yourself and shooting arrows into the woods and hoping to hit some prey. You know, I mean, yeah, we got lucky twice, but it's really hard. I should preface, I'm a vegan, so I don't know why I'm using hunting analogies, but we'll stick with it because it worked. So the way we thought about it is like, well, this is just going to be too hard work. You know, we can't email everyone in the world. We're going to get spam blocked. Is how do we lay tripwires in the woods where we think people that might be interested in API Gateway are going to run? Trust me, I don't mean to shoot my customers or trip them up, but you know, how do I catch their attention is really what I'm thinking about. And we looked at all sorts of things. So, you know, we sponsor some rate limiting projects. So rate limiting, our rate limiter is like a really advanced feature in Zuplo. If you're thinking of doing rate limiting, I'm just working on an article about this right now. You know, we run a rate limiter distributed at the edge. We can do custom rate limits. So your free customers get different rate limits to your premium customers and things like that. So we sponsored a bunch of rate limiting libraries and mentioned that, hey, look, this is a cool library, but if you want to do this fully managed and not think about deploying it and managing Redis and blah, 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 we'll do it for you and you'll be done in like a day, you know, less than hours, honestly. We did that. We have developer documentation. So we sponsored some developer documentation related sites. So we thought of that as laying tripwires. And on that theme, I'm really interested in the idea of like, you know, developers who are very small scale, loving Zuplo as well. So like hobbyists and folks really starting out with just an idea. Maybe they've not fundraised or they're very early. And I'm like, where would they be starting to build? Where would they be spending time? And obviously Superbase is a big thing for that crowd I've just described, right? And Superbase is an awesome product. Love it. I've met the founder, Paul, great guy. They present a Postgres API, but it's not kind of like enough of an API to be API first, right? Like, you know, you can't sort of ship that and say, I'm now Stripe. So I realized the combination of Zuplo plus Superbase is like, oh, people can have like a Stripe quality experience over the Superbase backend. And so let's go lay some tripwires and see if people come. And it's been pretty successful for us, actually. We've got some great customers and some great friends like yourself, Jack, through that work. We're going to do more. I'll leak some secrets, but we'll probably do some Firebase stuff and similar. So I'm always thinking of like where will potential customers that would love Zuplo, where will they be hanging out? Let's go and get their attention. That was the partnerships thing. Sorry, what was the other question?
Yeah, that's great. Really great answer. Yeah, I guess I got caught in your tripwire.
Yeah.
So then the other one was about the videos, because your videos they're really good.
Well, thank you. I gotta be honest, I've got a little less. I've practiced. I've done this a lot over time. I've got so experience. I love Harry Stebbings from 20VC. It's a great podcast. If you're into startups and business and venture, it's awesome. But I think the reason I bring him up here is nothing to do with that. Is he just talks all the time about like you just got to start making content and practicing and doing it. And I agree. So I started a long time ago. Recently leaned in. I take it fairly seriously, so I do invest in like decent equipment. I've got like a nice mic and the Shure headphones here, so I can hear what's going into the mic, hear my own voice. Wanted the background to look cool, so we got like the Zuplo logo, merch, and yeah, I don't know. I think a little bit lucky. I honestly I get accused of the British accent being a big factor, Jack. I don't know if you get that, but if you look at my Twitter profile, it says the accent takes all the credit. But it does work. I'll be honest. So I think some of our early videos were pretty trash. Honestly, if you go onto our channel, the Zuplo channel, you'll find some of our old ones. Like the form factor's not right. It's square because I thought everyone was watching on their phones, and I did a bad job. But just kept getting better, and we weren't getting many views, honestly. And I think that's quite disheartening. But you really do have to just keep sticking at it, and you will get better as a result of that art. You'll get faster. You'll get more efficient. So, I'm going to steal the name of your editor to help me, but I edit the videos myself right now, and I've got pretty quick at it and notice what I like. I also watched a lot of content and said, what do I like about this content? And tried to sort of copy that. I like to reduce a lot of the noise. I don't, my favorite thing is when you go to a YouTube video and you're trying to solve a problem and you get 5 minutes of, hey, you guys, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, get to the freaking point. So I try and do that quickly. But yeah, I don't have a master plan on that, honestly. So I'm quite flattered that you would say it.
Yeah, I think it's really good. Yeah, for those listening, maybe check it out. I think it's like a really good example of good developer videos.
Actually, it takes a while. So I think it's over a year since we started doing videos, and we'd get like 10 views, 7 views. And it almost gets to the point where you're a little bit ashamed to put it out there or ask someone to come on a show because you're like, my numbers are so low. But actually, people are nice. Actually, no one's ever said anything about that. And then it starts to build. And like we did a video not long ago, and I hadn't had my eye on it until someone told me, and it just crossed, I think 3,150 views. And so we're going to keep going. Just keep going. I'm sure it's going to get better. I've got more ideas now. I'm more inspired by seeing what's taking off because I've put more content out there. I'm like, oh, people like that. People like this. So you just got to be in the game, really, I think.
Yeah, that's really good. Really good point. Yeah, just sticking with it. I think that's all we've got time for, Josh. But one of the things we've started doing is takeaways. So I wonder if you've got any TLDRs for our listeners.
TLDL, what does that stand for?
Too long, didn't listen.
Too long, didn't listen. Okay, yeah.
I don't know if it quite works on this format, but I feel weird saying TLDR.
TLDR. So Zuplo API management you actually want to use, whether you're a large company, we have large customers and small customers. Startups are using us to sort of get a Stripe quality experience and ship their API real quick. Like honestly, the fastest I've done it is 2 hours, but people are now able to get an API out in a week and not worry about API key auth and docs and rate limiting, and it's programmable. So all that stuff. Some of our thoughts on product, I think, are, if you're out there building a product, really think about removing friction and how you can do that. One other thing to listen to actually is Brian Chesky of Airbnb talks about building an 11-star experience. I love that thought experiment because you go through each star, you step up. What's a 5-star experience using a gateway? What's an 11-star? Well, that's Jeff Bezos shows up and does it for you. Now it sounds silly. It gets real silly at 11 stars, but it suddenly makes the 5-star conversation seem reachable. And so you go and build that. So I love that. simplifying. If building a product, like really think about every piece of infrastructure you add. I think code is cheap, but infrastructure is not. Honestly, it's kind of like one of our mantles that we rewrite code often. But once you put pieces of infrastructure in place, they just have gravity about them that, sort of builds dust and particles and what do we call those things flying around the earth that are taking things out? So avoid that. Yeah, those are some of the things. Lay tripwires. Don't shoot blindly into the woods.
Yeah. And where can people learn more about Zuplo and about yourself?
So Zuplo.com, Zuplo. That's the website. You'll find everything you need on there. You can sign up, free trial. We have a fully free tier. So you get, I think 250,000 API requests per month and access to the full product on that. We have some customers kind of in production on free, which is fun. And me, probably on Twitter at Josh Twist. Pretty easy. JoshTwist.
Amazing. And if you're thinking about building a dev tool and you want to ship something fast, I definitely think it's worth checking out Zuplo because, it can make things way easier. Thanks so much for joining, Josh. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, folks.